Welcome, everyone, to the AI for Curation session. This is one of two. A friendly person who I cannot keep names straight, so sorry. She will come up at the end and give you a preview for the second session, and I'm only first just because of flip of a coin. So, yeah. All right, but welcome. So this is a new type of session, honestly, a personal experiment. So I am a heliophysicist person at an earth science meeting leading a session. Why on earth would I bother with this? Well, it took 3 years to get here, so I'll say that. But it's a huge priority in heliophysics to learn from what the other sciences are doing because we are convinced that other sciences probably have a smart path forward on some things that we are also challenged with. For example, speeding up curation through whatever useful and reasonable means necessary. Current topic is AI. So we have a backlog in heliophysics that we need to get through to get things done. We want to do things efficiently and in a modern way. So I created this evil plan to get things done faster by having this session where I can pick everyone's brains across the sciences, at least the NASA-funded ones, right? Staying within scope for my job, right? So hence the session. So we have gathered presenters from all 5 NASA sciences divisions. So let's see if I can get it right on the speaker. So earth science, obviously, heliophysics, astronomy and astrophysics, biological and physical sciences, and then planetary sciences. Our earth science speaker is MIA. If anyone sees David Nielsen around, that would be great. But yeah, he is. So unfortunately, and ironically, we have no earth science speaker today, but the other session will definitely cover that for us. So thank you for being here. Our presenters from the biological and physical sciences are recorded for logistical reasons. They also had problems with permissions, but the rest of our talks are either in person or virtual, so you will hear them live. Now, one piece for this is there is a channel on our ESIP Slack called AI number 4 and then Curation. We're going to use that for Q&A because some of the presenters cannot attend ESIP, but would still like to be available to answer your questions. So we're going to do it that way. Great. So our purpose here is to show off the things that we're doing across the 5 science divisions at NASA. There is definitely much more going on than what's represented in this session. So let me throw that caveat out there. But given an hour and a half, we're going to PowerPoint you to death, which I usually don't do for a session, but to give everyone space on this platform to show what they're doing to all of you, that's the point. Here's our agenda. We're going to shift this just a little bit. So we have a presentation from Science Explorer. That's our cross-disciplinary presentation that's Kelly Lockhart is going to give. And then 2 other presentations. By the way, Nick, are you in the room? Good, thank you. I've been trying to track you down for 2 days. I saw you somewhere. Great. So we've loosely grouped our presentations to not like pound you with 7 or 8 presentations and then make you remember questions. We tried to group them by topic. So our first 3 presenters focus on extracting metadata from publications. And then we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A there just for some quick Q&A. Then we're going to have, well, except for David Nielsen, whatever's going on, we'll have the other 4 presenters present. 2 of those will be recordings, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So it's a slight change from what you see on the slide. I'll change it later. But without further ado, let me hand it off to Kelly Lockhart. I'm going to allow the presenters to introduce themselves to save time.
Am I keeping my own time?
I have a timer.
Okay.
Beth, where are you?
Right here.
She will wave at you when you need to talk less. Okay, so you just hit slideshow and you have a video that is already queued up here.
Yeah, and the video should be embedded if we're running it off of Google Slides.
It's slideshow.
We'll give it a try, see how it goes. Okay. There we go. Hey, there it goes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Lockhart. I'm the technical lead for the Science Explorer, or SciEx. And today I'll be talking about extracting data and software from publications. So, quick intro for those of you who don't know, SciEx is the NASA-funded literature and research discovery platform for the Earth and space sciences. It builds on the infrastructure of the astrophysics data system, which is a long-term project in astrophysics. And we're expanding that infrastructure to cover all of the NASA science fields, including Earth science. It's an open platform, free for users to use. And the point is to really, it's by scientists for scientists. It's meant to be research infrastructure, not a commercial discovery platform. And one thing that we do is we realize that science is not just papers. It's also, in addition to the publications, it's authors, affiliations, citations, data sets, software, all of the other parts of research artifacts that go along with those papers. And so I try to connect and curate all of those things together. So we curate and connect and expose all of this through our user interface and our APIs. So why does linking to the data and software matter? Kind of the first big picture here. And really, science isn't just about the papers. If you want to be able to understand, reproduce, or expand upon the science, you need access to the data sets and the software that go into making that science. In addition, FAIR principles make discoverability and reuse essential. At the same time, publications are scaling quickly. So in astronomy alone, this is the annual number of refereed publications per year in astronomy, and they've more than doubled since 1980. Since we're also adding disciplines at the same time, we're expanding to cover the earth sciences, this is starting to make manual curation unsustainable. So we do have to automate, but we need to figure out how to do so in an efficient way. The point isn't necessarily to use AI everywhere, but to use the correct tool for the job. Really, we want to choose the simplest, reliable tool for all of our curation needs. So AI is the right tool for certain tasks. Fuzzy, ambiguous, context-dependent tasks, you really need machine learning or generative AI to help you there. However, and so we can see these in a few of these other projects that we're working on right now. So we have a discipline classifier. Basically, we're assigning scientific disciplines at a broad level to papers, astrophysics versus planetary, for example. And that one we're moving into production as we speak. Also, we have a keyword assignment algorithm. It assigns unified astronomy thesaurus keywords to astronomy publications. Again, this also uses a small trained model. We're working on this in beta right now. And part of the reason that we're starting to use language models for this is you can't do simple string matching in the text in order to find scientific keywords. Different authors refer to different concepts in different ways, but they really mean the same thing. And so how do we capture all of those different nuances of meaning into a single keyword? You can't just do a regex on it and expect to find everything that you want. So that's currently in beta, and we were trying to use just smaller models, but it looks like we need to expand to use the larger language models as well there. And all of this is built on some domain-tuned small language models that we've developed in-house or in collaboration with others, Astrobert and Indus. All of these have been tuned on either just astronomy or all of the NASA SMD disciplines. And those models are freely available on Hugging Face to use. So what does this look like for data and software extraction? So what we have in production right now actually doesn't use AI at all. This is a structured task, and we can use just regular structured code to do this. So right now we have two different workflows, two complementary workflows in production. First of all, if software or data sets are cited in the bibliography, they're extracted along with the rest of the references with our reference extraction pipeline, and they're indexed and linked as citations. In addition, some people will mention the URLs or the DOIs of the data sets and softwares that they use in the data availability statement of papers. So we'll go through and scan the data availability statements for papers, extract all those DOIs and URLs. We're also working on extending this to the body of the paper eventually. For URLs, we will link them as external links. We'll provide those links on the publication page. For DOIs, first we resolve those DOIs and see if they exist in the SciEx corpus. If they do, then we'll link those as a mention. If they don't, then we still add that external link. But not all data sets and software are explicitly mentioned by DOI or URL in the text. So this is where AI really is helpful. So our process right now, and this is still very much an R&D project, is we've defined annotation guidelines. Human experts have defined annotation guidelines, and then gone through and manually annotated a subset of papers. with the types of data and software that they are. Then we give Claude that same set of papers and also the annotation guidelines and ask it to go and do that same annotation. We use the human annotations as the benchmark there. And then we use those Claude annotations. We can expand that to cover a bigger swath of papers because it doesn't require human time. So we take those Claude annotations and feed them to the more efficient open models and fine tune those. So right now what we're finding, and again, this is still very much R&D, they're actively working on it right now, is the smaller models do a pretty good job about labeling what type of mention that they see. But they're not so good at finding everything. So sometimes people refer to software and data in slightly ambiguous ways. And so we're still working on our annotation guidelines and our fine tuning to get those better. Okay, and so then what does this look like in practice? And I'm going to probably stop this midway through. Okay, so in SciEx, here I've chosen a single refereed publication. And you can see we have the citations indexed, but we also have mentions indexed. So again, these are extracted from the data availability statement. I have a data set and I have software. If I go and click on the software, okay, I go and click on the software, and you can see here that we have both citations to this software indexed, but we also have credits indexed as well. And so the credits are anywhere where this paper has been mentioned in the data availability statement. Okay, and let me pause this here and I will just jump to my lessons learned. Okay, so quickly, lessons learned is it's important to choose the right tool for the job. Structured extraction, machine learning, or generative AI are all important and all have their uses. But it's important not to over-choose. Choosing generative AI when you just need structured extraction costs you in time, money, compute, and other resources. Integration is really hard. You can spin up a R&D project using the best version of Claude you absolutely can and get something good, but that's not necessarily going to scale for the full corpus. It's not going to make sense. Human in the loop is vital in order to maintain the trust and reliability in the system. And then finally, a lot of this can be reused. You can reuse the same labeled data sets and workflows across all of these projects. Okay, and you can get involved. We will talk about this later if you have any questions, and thank you.
So, hello everyone. Sorry I can't be there in Austin with you, but I'm hailing from Baltimore. My name is John Wu, and I'm a tenure-track astronomer at the Space Telescope Science Institute, where I'm also the applied AI scientist in the Data Science Mission Office. And apart from that, I hold secondary appointments in Johns Hopkins University in the Department of Physics, as well as in the Department of Computer Science. And today I want to talk about how we can evaluate the scientific productivity of our missions, these NASA-funded missions, for astrophysics by using large language models. So really talking about using AI to empower our bibliometrics. And so specifically, I'm thinking about questions like, how do we count the number of papers that are, enabling new science directly from new telescope data? And so if you look at this curve here in the salmon, you've got the Hubble Space Telescope, the number of new papers that are demonstrating science with the Hubble Space Telescope through the guest observing program. Basically, anybody can request data through Hubble or propose for that rather. And so it's competitive, and then if you can justify some sort of new observations that are taken, then you can also go and perhaps write a paper about that. And in fact, we see Hubble's been around for 36 years and it's got this rich legacy of publications. And James Webb, JWST, has also been rapidly rising, amassing over 400 papers, scientific publications last year that demonstrate new science. But science is not only directly as a result of new data, but also archival data. And so we're also interested in evaluating the impact, for example, of the Mikulski Archive for Space Telescopes, or MAST. And you can see in this paper that's compiled by Dick Shaw et al. That there are many, many purely archival studies that are showing new science, which is, again, directly a result of Hubble or JWST data, but through an archival entry. Okay, so we'd like to go ahead and count those papers, but how do we actually know which of these are new, science papers using HST or JWST? Well, somebody has to read all of them. And as we just heard from Kelly, the numbers of papers every year is rapidly increasing, not just the refereed papers, not just the non-refereed papers, but also things like software and data sets and things that we really want to take stock of. And in addition, we're also very excited because in a little over a month, a new NASA flagship mission is going to launch, the Roman Space Telescope. But that's also kind of scary because we've got to also determine, how many new papers every year is that going to enable. And in order to do this, again, I just want to concretely specify the problem. We think that using large language models gives us a robust and scalable way to perform automated mission classification. So for example, you might ask, given any single paper, and then given a specific mission of interest, so the Hubble Space Telescope, James Webb, Roman, but of course you can go beyond the ones that we typically follow at Space Telescope Science Institute, to Chandra or perhaps to other facilities in other NASA science fields. We can ask, did this publication demonstrate new science as a result of that data? Or is it maybe doing some sort of engineering or instrumentation? Or perhaps is it just giving a passing mention, which is also interesting sometimes to check. And not only that, but you also want to double check this large language model's output and determine how confident is its classification. Like if it gives a score, how is it between 0 to 1? Is it very confident that this is a science paper? We'd also like to be able to verify this through justifications. The large language models have a chain of thought reasoning or some sort of justification that it can actually explicate to you. And also you would like it to give quotes that actually support its reasoning. Okay, and quickly through the system design, what I'm talking about is taking this paper, distilling it down to its plain text, which is certainly going to miss some information, for example, in figures and things like that. But this is a good starting point. We then want to take that huge body of text, something like 10,000 plus 20,000 or so words, and distill it down into just a few snippets where mission-specific keywords are mentioned. And so in this case, we are performing something like named entity recognition or even just string matching, simple text filtering, where we then go and broaden each mention or each match of a mission-specific keyword onto the surrounding few sentences so that we can get some of the context. We then use something called a re-ranker large language. It's a specific type of language model, which is really able to say, given a question like the question we're interested in is, whether or not this paper is potentially a science paper that by the Hubble Space Telescope, then, it's given a snippet of text and it evaluates how relevant that particular snippet of text is. So the prior step gives you a very complete sampling of all mission-specific keywords. So maybe Hubble, you'll have one of the instruments on board is known as the Cosmic Origin Spectrograph. So get everything with COS, labeled as a potential, hit that this is a Hubble paper. But then the re-ranker now is able to filter those down. And so not any substring of COS gets pulled in, but rather only the most relevant ones, which actually are helpful for determining whether or not it's a Hubble science paper. We can then ask another science-specific large language model to perform structured extraction. So again, grabbing these relevant quotes or justification, and then finally give a numerical score, which can lead to a classification. And so to be concrete, this is the kinds of outputs for a real in-operation system where we are looking at archive papers and trying to identify whether or not they are presenting new JWST science. So we can, have some sort of paper identifier, but we also provide a score. In this case, it's 0.9. I apologize for lots of text on this. But you don't have to really read it. There's just basically a blurb for the rationale that it gives over here. And then it's got, at the bottom, a couple of quotes that most support its justification. And this is actually being used, as I mentioned, in operations, because it turns out it's actually sort of feeding back into the data provenance side of things. We are interested whenever people write a JWST paper that shows new science, we ask them to record a digital object identifier, which can then be used for later readers to go and access the data. They can point to the data and make their analysis replicable. But not all authors are aware of this. And so we have a team, the library team at Space Telescope Science Institute, that can find preprint papers. Yes?
Time check.
Okay. And so this helps us alert authors about that requirement and thereby we can send an email and quickly check on them. And this allows our staff to safely skip 2/3 of papers. And so this is actual work that's being done in operations and saving us real time. And the false negative rate is extremely strong. I don't have time to talk about this, but we've also demonstrated this in an independent sort of Kaggle competition, where in our case, our large language model, which is directly forked out of that in operations piece of software, is actually demonstrated very strong performance, an F1 score of 0.84, which is competitive with some of the other other entries in this Kaggle competition, which tries to go and again label missions in terms of whether they're science, engineering, or mention papers. But you can go ahead and look at a paper here, in which we do a more detailed breakdown of the labels. And finally, I just want to emphasize that it is important to, check humans, which we usually regard to be the ground truth, with a consensus review. And so performing some sort of a golden sample, compiling like a multiple check ground truth study is helpful for evaluating both humans on their first pass of pulling out whether or not these papers are science papers or not science papers, and also doing the same for LLMs. And what we find is that LLMs actually exceed now the ability of humans to classify these science papers. Okay, so that's a lot out there, and I know that I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to leave these takeaways here on the slide. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. I'm a data scientist at IPAC at Caltech, and today I'll be talking about how we're using AI to accelerate the extraction of data from published journal articles, as well as some other AI-related projects that are happening at IPAC. So IPAC is a science data center that is hosted by Caltech and funded by NASA. Two of the archives that are at IPAC include the Extragalactic Database, or NED, and the NASA Exoplanet Archive. NED contains over 1 billion distinct extragalactic objects, including galaxies, quasars, and gamma ray bursts. And then some of the main parameters that are extracted from journal articles for NED are the object type, the redshift, and the coordinates. Meanwhile, Exoplanet Archive has over 6,200 confirmed exoplanets now, as well as candidate exoplanets and their stellar hosts. Some of the parameters extracted for Exoplanet Archive are the planetary mass, transit depth, and detection method. And the Exoplanet Archive is expecting to include many hundreds of thousands of more potential planet candidates in the near future with some upcoming space missions. Additionally, NED is already facing challenges in ingesting all the data that come out regularly for their articles of interest. And so both archives have these challenges with data scale that have been talked about in some of the previous talks already. So we need to find ways to ingest data from these articles faster. Oh, perfect. Great, thanks. Okay, so here's a high-level overview of what the data ingestion pipeline looks like for both NED and the Exoplanet Archive. So we start off by getting articles from journal publications from sources such as SciEx. We then run them through a relevance classification module, which is already in place and is using traditional machine learning methods for both archives. A scientist then verifies which articles are relevant. That then moves to the data extraction component, which is the main topic of my talk. And then an analyst will review the AI's outputs, or in previous years, they'll make the file themselves, and then they'll ingest that data into the database. And this is all about transforming data that's in the article into the load file specific format for these archives. So here's a more detailed view of the actual data extraction component of that pipeline. So we start off by getting the PDF or HTML from a journal, and then there's some pre-processing steps we take to extract the text and the tables from those articles. We then do some initial passes to try to find the names using regular expressions, names of astronomical objects, that is, as well as the parameter labels, so the actual symbols that are used to represent the redshift or the mass or whatever. That's using a light LLM call to try to find those. The processed text and then the small tables are then passed to the first main LLM call, which is performing name extraction. That tries to find all of the object names in the article that were not found initially by the regular expressions. And the name extraction then passes its outputs to the second stage of LLM extraction, which is the actual structured output. And that is performed on the article text as well as the smaller tables. Meanwhile, all of the large tables as well as the small tables are extracted through a separate programmatic approach that's taking advantage of the table structure. And then the parameter extraction from the LLM and the data that are extracted from the tables are merged, and then that is ultimately used to create the load file. And one of the great benefits of this work is that, at least in the case of NED, we have decades of historical load files, and so we can use these for evaluations. And then once we've evaluated generated files, we can then use those to iterate improvements on the overall pipeline. So before I show some of the results, I'll talk about how we score these articles. So we calculate a precision, recall, and F1 score for each of the articles, the entire load file itself, as well as just the name extraction component, and in addition to the each parameter independently. Now, there are some complications that come along with this. So something that's come up is that there's often, or somewhat often, data that's appearing in the truth file that is not actually in the article text. So there was some human decision there that transformed the data in a different way, but that's ultimately dropping the recall. Also, we found that the LLM often extracts data that is appearing in the file, in the article, but not in the load file. So this drops the precision. So these are some things to keep in mind as we look at these scores. So there are some complications in how these numbers come out. And with this in mind, we've chosen to tune our pipeline to favor recall over precision, with the thought being that's easier to remove data from a load file rather than go back into the article and find what was missing. And all this being said, it's very important that we have human vetting afterwards, after the file is generated, in order to verify what we have is correct. And we're targeting a median recall of 0.9 as we get ready to move this tool into full production. Right now, it's in a beta phase. So here are some of the latest results for the NED and Exponent Archive pipeline scores. Again, focusing on the recall, we have a recall of 0.86 for the NED case and a recall of 0.69 for the Exponent Archive case. This is using the LLM Quen 3.6, the 35 billion parameter version of that. And these numbers are the macro average of the aggregate sets. So what you'll notice right away is that the NED scores are a lot higher than the Exponent Archive scores. And this is sort of to do with the actual nature of the articles for these two different domains. So the NED articles, the NED domain has a lot of different types of names and different types of objects. However, relatively few objects or relatively few parameters for each of these objects. Whereas Exponent Archive has many more parameters that they're looking for, both in total number of parameters and also in the parameters per object. So this makes it a bit more difficult to make those associations between the objects and parameters. In addition, the Exponent Archive files need to go through unit conversion for some parameters, and so that adds an extra step. You'll also notice that the Exponent Archive total time is a lot longer than the NED total time. That's because for Exponent Archive, we're primarily testing in PDFs, whereas NED, we're using HTMLs just to try two different file sources. And part of using the PDFs is that sometimes the table parsing will fail. So in that case, we have an image fallback, basically using the visual element of the LLM. And it's able to recover the data from the tables in a lot of cases, but it does take a lot longer. So that's sort of a trade-off there. So now I'll talk about some of the other AI projects that are happening at IPAC. First one is called AstroFetch. This is converting natural language into ADQL queries, which ADQL is basically an astronomy version of SQL. This is being performed by BJ Fulton. Next is Ursa's SphereX Assistant. This also converts natural language, this time into ways to search for information within lengthy and complex documentation. We also have Ursa skill files, which are basically giving AI assistants access to the Ursa conventions, and that's able to enable efficient and reliable access to that data. And then there's also a research group at IPAC, which is using deep learning for galaxy surveys. So if you're interested in any of these projects, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the authors. So to summarize the work that I've been doing, the AI-powered pipeline is currently in beta and being tested out by staff at IPAC, but it's able to create near production-ready load files for at least a subset of some of the articles that are of interest to both archives. The NED is a bit further along the Exponent Archive, but we're working on catching that side up as well. And these are basically serving as a starting point for the load file creation. The human operators can then go in, and hopefully this will save them time on their job of extracting data. And what's really nice, like I mentioned, that we have these historical load files. These enable us to compute these quantified metrics and really have helped drive progress in this. Thank you very much.
I see no questions on Slack. So once again, the channel is AI, the number 4, Curation. So jump on there and throw your questions in if we don't get it. If we don't get to it today, then the presenters can answer that later on Slack. So you'll definitely get those answers. So if you have a question, Lynn will run the mic to you. Just raise your hand. Seeing no hands shoot up super fast. Oh, there's one hand online. Go ahead, Larissa.
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much for all presenters. Really amazing work. Bravo, bravo. I just want to put connect name with the face. I'm Larissa Shalkin. I'm a new chair for Education Committee at ESIP. And I just would like to let you know that I will be following up with each and every one of you. And your task would be to really help us to close the gap. Really, students really need to know what you are working on, and you need to really explain it to them in the appropriate language so that high schooler can really comprehend your work analysis, so to speak. So yeah, and again, thank you very much, and I'll follow up with you. My name is Larissa, and I'm joining with you from Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, back to you.
All right. I'll take responsibility for the next question, seeing no hands raised. All right, one's coming on Slack. We'll let you type it up. Okay, so eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay, so can I throw you a curveball? All right, so there was a presenter in another session that I think it was this morning or yesterday, but they showed that their tool, they were using 6 different sources to get the data citations and publications, and SciEx was one of those sources. And of course, you'll have the most out of all 6 of them, but there were some that were uniquely detected on one of the other 6, like I think it was Google Scholar and something else, that SciEx didn't detect for some reason. Can you throw some ideas out about why that might be missed?
Yeah. So it really depends on where exactly. Was it actually in the citations? Yeah, okay. So that's one question. Question 1 is like, is it actually formally cited in the references section? If so, it should have been caught. If we didn't catch it, maybe we decided it was too far outside of the bounds of what our corpus should be. So again, our main focus is the NASA S&D science areas. So if it's something wild, maybe we just decided not to index it. If it wasn't formally cited in the bibliography, then again, if it was in the data availability statement with the DOI or the URL, we would expect to catch it. If it's somewhere else, we're not yet mining the full text of the paper, but we are working on doing that right now. So if somebody just put it in a footnote, we will have it eventually. And then finally, the project that I'm working on, if you only mention it by name, so if you just are looking at Python or something, but you don't actually have like a DOI to that, that's what our project that we're working on is doing right now. So there's a few reasons, but yeah, if it's a real concern, then we can look at that together. Yeah.
All right, question in the room, and then we'll take one on Slack.
Thank you. So my question is for John. Is the idea of kind of what you're doing to get to understand the value that is being created by these telescopes? Is that the root of it? Trying to understand essentially if there's more papers referencing these different missions or different telescopes, then they are adding value. Is that the underlying premise?
That's, a pretty critical assumption. Of course, we know that there's a lot more to understanding a mission's impact simply than counting the number of papers that comes out. So I definitely don't think we should over-index on that. But that is a commonly accepted metric for thinking about research or scientific productivity. And so it's definitely one that we've tracked for a long time, right, for decades with Hubble. And so it's also one worth preserving and thinking about how we can bring with a modern AI stack, and one where we can also compare the current modern AI stack's outputs against the ones that have historically been done by humans.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? What other, besides, I guess, obviously the number of papers, what are other things that you guys kind of consider in terms of added value of these? And I'm not from a super science background, hence the question, but just thinking as if somebody's thinking about the bottom line of okay, how much value is this mission or this thing that we're doing adding? What are some other metrics that you all use?
So because I'm not a bibliographer, or I guess it's really not in my place to say what's the best accepted metric. I mean, in some sense, one could say that astronomy specifically, I'm an astronomer. It's really a natural philosophy, and it's not exactly the most commercially desirable one. But I think there's a lot more to science, and in pursuit of science, we find that there's a lot of reasons to go for it that can't always be quantified. So I do appreciate your question, because I think that it highlights that there's way more to science than things that we can count or measure with AI or with human tools.
Okay, I'll take the question off Slack and then one online. I'm trying to alternate. Okay, so, Kogan, do you want to just voice your question from Slack? I will say it then, as you wish. Okay, so what are some of the more annoying or constant failure modes in extraction? We talk a lot about success, but what are the places where extraction fails consistently? Do we need to change how we write or document, or does the tool chain need to change somehow? Anyone can answer briefly.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say the exact failure points of extraction. In my case, for a while I thought it was correlated with the number of objects that were in the article. Thinking more objects, makes it more difficult to extract all the data from them. But a lot of times when there's more objects like that, they'll be published in machine readable tables. So that actually makes it easier to read. So what really is driving a lot of the difficulties in my work is when people use unexpected names for objects or labels for parameters that are not easily recognizable. So if there's just a standardized set of name formats, name types, and parameter labels, that would make things a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. For us, our corpus is so big, we have 35 million articles right now, that using LLMs just gets very expensive and very slow. So anything that you can do that we can apply structured rule sets for is really nice. So stick DOIs in there, cite things, it's faster. And then we try to clean up with LLMs as we go.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in as well and say that, both false negatives and false positives are issues, incompleteness, and impurity. And so that's why, we've taken the approach of this sort of multi-step process, one to preserve the completeness, and then the second one to winnow that down. But they're all potential issues.
Is it quick?
Thanks.
Give it a shot.
So this work is great. It's very impressive. Just wondering if there are practical constraints for those of you, it might be two of you that are using the full PDFs and you're operationalizing things like license restrictions or anything else that some of us might be curious how you work through that.
Yeah. So this is a big one for us, actually, because if you're just a researcher, you can usually get away without having to worry about licensing. But since we are a full organization that's been around for a while, we have to be really careful. We have publisher agreements in place that say exactly what we can and can't do with things. So for the most part, publishers, this is changing a little bit now. For the most part, publishers are fine with us doing what we call metadata enrichment and things like that. We can use the PDFs. We extract the text from the PDFs. We have a whole workflow to extract text from PDFs or from the XMLs if the publishers give us those. And publishers are fine with us using those that data for our own internal enrichment purposes. That's not a problem. What's becoming more of a problem right now with new publisher agreements that we're seeing is publishers are starting to figure out how they can monetize scientific text. And so we have some new publisher agreements that are coming down the pipe that don't even want us to expose abstracts to users anymore because they're trying to make money on those themselves. So I think this is really, right. So I feel like this is going to be a big problem that science is going to face. Open science in particular is how do we get access to this data for genuine scientific workflows without, while publishers are trying to do something with AI. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. One more quick answer.
Yeah, so data access is also can also be an issue in my work as well. A lot of times we want to focus on the actual published versions of articles, and my pipeline will go to try to download that article, but it'll be flagged as a bot. And the problem is that it is a bot. So we need to find a way to sort of get around that in some cases. And what that means is either using the archive version, which is oftentimes more publicly accessible, or there actually were agreements between NED and some of these specific journal articles to get HTMLs of those. So there had to be some negotiations going on behind the scenes.
We're out of time for this section. If your question was not asked, please put it on the ESIP Slack so that it gets the attention it needs. Let's thank our first round of speakers one more time.
Okay, hi. I'm Lynn Necris. I'm here representing the Planetary Data System. This is a joint presentation from a couple of our nodes. Myself at the Atmospheres node at New Mexico State. We've got Tom Stein from Geosciences node in St. Louis, and our engineering node people. Oh yeah, yeah. All right. Now that that's up. So a little bit of history. I don't know if I want to spend too much on this. I don't want to get to the other parts of this, but the PDS is a distributed node system with different disciplines. And we are the primary long-term archive for digital mission data, ground-based observations, planetary analog lab and field data. This has been established in the mid-'80s to start trying to save all of the great data that was coming out of the '60s and '70s. The one thing that we're going to take a step back a little bit here and talk about metadata. And one of the major advances for us in Planetary over the last several years has been the development of our PDS-4 system, which is the latest iteration in our archiving standard. This was developed over the past 20 years, taking experience from the old way we did this in PDS-3 and moving it into the new system as an information model-driven standard, ontology-based approach, all of those things. But the big thing here is that this was also developed with international support. So the PDS-4 standard is an international standard that our international partners through the IPDA, International Planetary Data Alliance, are also using. So if you go to get data from ESA or you go to get data from JAXA, the labeling of the metadata will be done pretty much the same way. So metadata, one of the big takeaways here, and this has been a theme throughout all of the talks here at this conference, is that metadata are infrastructure. They're not paperwork. So it's worth taking the time to get the metadata right and try to get those as much detail as possible. So we look for a quality spectrum of consistent and complete and clear, human readable and machine readable metadata that makes sense. And the more optional content that you have, the less AI training is going to do any good, right? So you want to have schema enforced things so you can get very specific things that help with AI enforcement and AI tools to go. And there's a spectrum for the way that the science has been done over the past 40, 50 years. So this reframes the stakes, and the metadata quality is not just an administrative concern, but a scientific one. And it demands that the corresponding investment here, the governance, the maintenance, and everything that goes with it has got to be taken into account. So ways that we've been looking at using AI to generally help with archiving is that preparation for archiving. Anybody who's archived data with the Planetary Data System knows that in the past it can be a pretty onerous process. When we want to get all the metadata correct, we put labels on everything and going through peer review and everything else to ensure that the quality. And so for AI, we look for stuff like as we train it on our PDS-4 archiving standards that identify our naming scheme, patterns, time, location, and coding. All of these types of things that can be prescribed in a way that AI can help with that as a good thing. This also helps with our interactions with our missions and some long-term data providers where we can have AI-assisted pipeline development. So once we start the process, we can kind of lock things in and let machine take over, and we are freed up to do other things. And this allows for cross-collection consistency analysis, identifying any problems that we have throughout the data sets and such. So with curation, moving on, so after we've gotten the data, looking at different ways that this can set up things. So one of the big terms now is looking for foundational models, and a lot of things are going with the Moon and Mars towards foundational models for the entire system. So we want to be able to take data from all aspects of the exploration and add those together to figure out larger problems. So search capabilities can be improved by natural language interfaces, data discovery, search enhancement here through increased interdisciplinary usage of data as they planned. And then navigating archive standards, direct curator assistances when we're looking for stuff to help people with it, or making sure that we've got everything backed up in the right places, navigating our standards, corresponding with individual data providers to get more information or to set up new things, interpretation of any documentation that comes through. So if you go back and take a look at data that came in from the 60s and 70s, documentation was not always the strong suit. So as we've moved these things into the future and have augmented stuff, going back and trying to figure out stuff, going back to the papers that we were just looking at, and journal articles to augment what we already have in the archive to make sure that the data are useful for the modern communities. And so we have our standards that basically put out detached XML labels that we use with that. So better metadata, making sure that we get the controls there is the big thing. So a few things that have gone here, and I've got a couple examples, and I may fly through this a little bit because we're on time, but assumption-based, things that can go wrong with archiving. So AI models like to fill gaps. And when you're looking at older data and even some of the newer data, the fluent and complete output here is not necessarily the best thing because you can fill in things that are not quite right. And then inferred values then become fact. And we don't want to do that. So we're making sure we try to estimate that. Incorrect inferred values can be propagated again as fact. And so our PDS4 labels are explicitly describe what is known. So if it's a blank field, there's a blank field. It's not that way. In the same way, when we're training AI tools to work with our data, some of the existing PDS archive data inherits whatever errors were in there and inconsistencies that are already there. Those errors can then be interpreted as very valid patterns for the AI training. And so we're concerned about that. Under our older versions, we've had to migrate things forward, and we're finding all kinds of different mistakes in older data as we move it to the newer system. And we're cleaning up these metadata for better use. So in this case, metadata need to be handled with care and used consistently, correctly to limit errors that propagate into tools. So a couple examples from geosciences here, and I can look at this. This is an old label in the ODL system, which is a JPL proprietary format. We're looking at planet day numbers, SOL number for Mars missions. It can be encoded in very many different ways and not uniquely. And when we go to transfer this into the newer data set metadata, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So we can't just take a keyword equal value over here and put it into another one. And so in that regard, being very careful to do these things as we move these things forward. If we were to let the AI do this, this would absolutely be a mess, because things would be put in weird places. And so that's one example. Another example is that spacecraft clock, an error that got put into the data when it was created, can be fixed now, but we have to know it's there. These examples would come out completely legitimate, completely valid, but they are wrong values, and the AI wouldn't know how to do with that. And so making sure that we have some of the science thing is still infused in there would be also good. So curation, semantic misunderstandings, local data dictionary drift, all stuff that we've been talking about along the way. So our information model and regular aim to minimize confusion by controlling our definitions. And this goes across all of the disciplines that are within the planetary data system. Okay, so a couple conclusions and I'm done. So for us, planetary data are diverse and complex. There's a huge amount of things that go into this. We have everything from every mission you can think of that goes to planets to ground-based observations, which have their own issues with telescopes and instruments, laboratory and field analog studies, which are a little bit different as well. So we do that. PDS4 represents our current state. A state-of-the-art metadata standardization, and its international standard. Quality metadata are the prerequisite for effective AI use, so we got to make sure that our metadata are right in the first place. So AI usage and planetary data curation must be grounded in quality metadata and all the governance structures that produce it. So that's the big part there, and there should be one more. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. My name is Walter. I'm a researcher with the Space Biosciences branch here at NASA Ames, and I'm also the co-lead for the AI for Life in Space group. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways that we're implementing AI to accelerate curation, specifically in space biology. A little bit about the program. We really study how life is impacted in outer space by looking at different species and through these experiments that are conducted either on the ISS or ground analogs like centrifuges and particle accelerators. It is collected, and really the idea is to try to understand how space flight, like microgravity, radiation stressors, affect living systems. NASA's repository for space biology data is the Open Scientific Repository, or OSDR for short. And under that umbrella, we have several projects that are responsible for curating and making that data accessible to the rest of the scientific community. So omics data like RNA-seq or single cell are all under the purview of GeneLab. Physiological data sets like tabular, text, imaging, those are all, are handled by LSDA. And the actual biospecimens themselves are also available for request through the NVIS program. And on our website, we have ways that you can contribute your own data sets, discover data sets from other experiments that have been conducted, as well as visualization tools to help explore sort of this vast array of space bio data. Over the years, our repository has grown, and a lot of the data that we have sort of spans different nationalities, different agencies, different organisms. And we are very lucky to have a team of curators to help facilitate the process of making that data accessible and standardized across the different experiments. Under that space, under the Open Scientific Repository, we also have the AI for Life in Space group, which is a group of scientists who work on developing AI machine learning pipelines to help support space bio missions and experiments. A lot of what we focus on is, for example, training AI machine learning models, how to integrate different data modalities, better learning across different locations, and then we also provide benchmark data sets and collaborate on tools and research projects. So as AI has developed over the last couple of years, so as our capabilities and the tools that we've been developing. So when we first started this, we were taking these local models and trying to find clever ways of being able to do things like segment tables out of Excel sheets that were very messy, using these like very local, very small models to automatically augment our data and tag it and generate these metrics pages, as well as trying to create summaries and even host our own chatbot that was like loaded onto a GPU that can handle requests. And along the way, every generation of new tools really gave us a sense for where does AI provide the greatest value. And so that all kind of culminated on this platform that we developed, the AI Cure software application that took everything into account. So it would take all different types of data, find ways to orchestrate the way the retrieval of ontologies, handle different data types, and have a chatbot that could sort of interface with the data that you were loading, and it would give curators sort of a panel where they can explore the data, and it would have already kind of these summaries of what the data was all about. And then the idea was you load all this data, and with a couple of clicks, you can get a standardized page that would have all the information about that particular study. But as we started building a lot of this custom software and building these like manual orchestration platforms, the tools and the models got a lot better. And so things like OpenAPI and MCP kind of exist that give access to large language models to be able to invoke tools or kind of access resources directly. And Amanda actually will talk a little bit more about how we use model content protocol or MCP servers to be able to transverse our knowledge graph to get the necessary information that we need. And so, as you'd expect, you can take advantage of these two sort of frameworks and then use it as a way to be able to give the model the information it needs to be able to decide which is the most optimal tool. So in the case of an OpenAPI spec sheet, you would generate this sort of standardized format that it gives the model a sense for how to request, call, and retrieve the documentation that it needs or the studies that it needs from the API that we have on the Open Science Data Repository. And Model Context Protocol gives a sort of a standardized way to be able to model and discover and invoke those tools. And so, but one thing that you can also do, right, is sort of think about, well, what type of data do I already have, and how can that data be used to, for example, train a model that would help in the curation process by maybe retrieving the necessary ontologies or finding similar studies to help facilitate that process. And so one approach that we've worked on is sort of finding a way to train a model that can support downstream curation, specifically trained on the experimental data itself. In this case, RNA-seq data. If you're not familiar with RNA-seq, you take two samples from two different tissues, a healthy and unhealthy one, and then you can, count the expression of these genes. And so the idea is like, we have a lot of this type of data. How can we use that to train the model and then help with these downstream tasks? And so we decided to kind of use a BERT model and generate something that we call these gene embeddings, right? But this is just another way to take the data set that we already have and sort of turn it into a representation that allows us to probe similar biological data sets. So what does that look like? Well, the utility is, we run the data set through the model, and the model generates these embeddings. And these embeddings can then be used as a way to represent the sample itself. Once you have the sample representation in this embedding, you can query against other embeddings from other samples to see which ones are the most similar. And so in our case, one of the interesting use cases is, if you had an astronaut RNA-seq sample, how could you use that new embedding representation to match against terrestrial RNA-seq data? And so here's sort of a platform that was built by one of our interns this summer, where you can take, for example, an OCR sample of mice liver, and then use these embeddings to search across other embeddings to find similar terrestrial samples, and then be able to retrieve that information for a downstream curation task. And so the idea here is that this is using one of the models that we trained on a set of RNA-seq data that we collected through the platforms like ArcGIS4 and Geo, where it just saw so many different RNA-seq data sets, then came up with a very useful representation that allowed us to match space bio data to terrestrial samples. What's so cool about this is that this is one way of being able to sort of retrieve that information by using this new embedding model. But then it also allows you to see where those unique samples match in the terrestrial sample space. And so it provides biological context, for example, curation. So here on the left-hand side, what you see is sort of a representation of what all the RNA-seq samples that exist in the ArcGIS4 database. And those dots are similar samples that the model was able to match from the spaceflight data set on the OCR.
For sake of time, I'm going to skip to his conclusions if I can find where that is. That looks about right. Here's hoping.
Yeah, we can put in, a lot of we're doing is starting from ways to train what we call foundational models to help support, the data lifecycle and the research lifecycle, to help researchers interpret data and then generate these new scientific hypotheses. Instead of building a model for like a different application, one of the cool things about foundational models is that you can train one domain-specific model that can unlearn the underlying biology and use those new representations to do things like retrieval, annotation, classification, and other downstream tasks. And so, when you combine this with different types of tools like SCPs and knowledge graphs, you sort of create an efficient way to help discover data that can then lead to, easier curation processes. So, all this work has been supported by a set of really interested people who are really passionate about open science. So it takes a village. So happy to be here and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker. At least he'll hear the recording later. It's good.
Hi, everybody. I am Sean Polson. I'm the tech lead of the Python and heliophysics community, and I'm here to talk to you today about building AI agents for heliophysics software metadata extraction and validation. This talk will focus around a tool I built called the HSSI Metadata Orchestrator. But first, I'm going to introduce myself and make sure that we're on the same page with the AI tools background, because actually, I'm surprised not many of these talks went too deep into the actual AI tools themselves. Anyway, I'm Sean Polson, research software engineer at LASP. I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. I'm the tech lead of the Python and heliophysics community. I work on the STCs for a couple NASA missions, and I'm a member of LASP's AI steering committee. But that's enough about me. We're here to talk about my tool. That is the HSSI Metadata Orchestrator. HSSI standing for the Heliophysics Software Search Interface, which is what you see here in the upper right. It is what it sounds like. It's a website we're building to help heliophysicists search for, filter, and discover software. As you'd imagine, you need a lot of metadata backing all the software to have anything to filter on and search on, and that's where my tool comes in. It is an AI agent that right now I have running in Claude Code, Codex, or Copilot. There are 3 different flavors for those tools, and that approach of just using out-of-the-box agentic coding harnesses is important to my central point of this talk here. The orchestrator agent manages sub-agents for extracting the metadata to put into the website, to validate that it's correct, to submit it, and then to update it. But before I get too deep into that, I will make sure that we all are on the same page on the AI background. So hopefully we're all familiar with agentic coding harnesses at this point, like Claude Code and Codex. You may be less familiar that you can customize their behavior out of the box. The first way to do this is using an agent instruction file, which is essentially a file by a particular name that all these tools are designed to look for in whatever folder they are opened in. And if it finds one, it automatically takes on those instructions. And in addition to those, we now have skills, sub-agents, and MCP servers. And I'm happy to go deeper into them if people have questions in the question part, but I'm going to skip over that. And just say that by customizing these out-of-the-box coding harnesses, you get 90% of the benefit of using a purpose-built AI with only 10% of the effort. And I really think people should be doing this if they are not already. Really, the main use case I can only picture for why not to do this is if you have to, say, deploy your agent on a website where users interact with it, in which case you would have to use an agent development kit, and there are many of them out there. But short of that, if you just want to get work done with AI, why reinvent the wheel? So anyway, with that background here, let's talk about the HSSI Metadata Orchestrator. Here's the homepage of our website again. And I'll say the first idea we had for how to get metadata was this resource submission form. And unfortunately, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that wasn't going to be a great solution because people don't like filling out big, long forms that take over an hour. And so the submissions we were getting were pretty sparse, like only the required fields were included. Anyway, we had to find a better way to do this. That was about midpoint last year, around the time that Claude Code started getting enough secret sauce to have like generalized code base understanding. And so I realized, hey, I should try to let it extract the metadata. And now it's interesting to talk about the history of building this tool because there was a version 1 that was just an extractor. And essentially all it was a prompt inside that agent instruction file that listed out the field forms. And it said, hey, given the GitHub repo, please find all the information to fill out this form. And it would stick it in this HSSI metadata.md file I'm showing on the right. And that already worked actually pretty good, even though the models were kind of crappier back then. And this was just the very first prototype. It predictably made some mistakes, though. Like it made weird decisions about what counted as related software or related instruments is something I'm remembering. And it often wouldn't read through 100% of a code base to get a comprehensive view of what all of its software functionalities were. So over time, I evolved it. I added skills and sub-agents. The skills particularly were extra instructions around the tricky parts that it typically messed up on, so it would stop making those same mistakes. And then the big addition was this validator sub-agent. which has this kind of skeptical adversarial personality where it assumes everything in the metadata file is wrong until proven otherwise. And the extractor goes in this validation loop with the validator where it makes the file, shows it to the validator complains, the extractor fixes it, and it loops until the validator is happy. And just by doing that, we cleared up essentially all of the problems that we were seeing with these metadata extractions. And now the feedback has been great. I've showed web pages to package maintainers, and they've universally said that they look great with maybe only minor tweaks to like a description or something every once in a while. And this is starting to feel like the holy grail of metadata extraction, right? Fully automated, working in production. And then just to close the loop on that, I was just copying and pasting out of that file into the form to put it in the website, but that got onerous. So to stop myself from copying and pasting, I made a submitter. Here's a screenshot of it running, and I think that was Codex in my terminal at the time. It builds a JSON payload in the shape our API expects from that metadata file, and then it submits it. And then it does a round trip verification to prove what we wanted to submit is actually what ends up in the website. So there's more validation built in. And then boom, it's on the website. So I got 30 seconds left here. Here's the diagram again of the orchestrator agent, which I will say one more time, has subagents for an extractor that extracts the fields into a file, and then a validator that validates it in a loop, a submitter to submit it, and then an updater to keep this up to date because software always evolves in the background and is constantly changing. They all use a shared layer of skills shown at the bottom. We are using this in production today. And I guess as one more layer of information, I can say that as practice, I always run this using the latest models and the highest thinking settings. Because why have a dumber agent do work when a smarter agent could do it? And I have the tokens to spend it. And the takeaways here are that I built the HSSI metadata orchestrator with pre-existing agentic coding harnesses. Customizing them is definitely the way to go, and I encourage people to do it if they want purpose-built AI. Start simple, add skills and subagents as needed. Validation loops guard against errors, and it's really easy to change the boilerplate to port this to a different tool if you need to. Here are QR codes for the 3 flavors of this tool I have now, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
About how we're leveraging knowledge graphs and MCP servers to help enable space life sciences data analysis. So first, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of NASA Open Life Sciences. In order to understand the impact of space hazards on terrestrial biology, we perform experiments both in space as well as analog studies here on Earth, and then we collect data at the molecular level, such as omics data, DNA, RNA, protein, etc., as well as look at physiological and phenotypic changes. We also collect information about the environment and the hardware associated with these experiments. All of these data are then made publicly available through the Open Science Data Repository. We also collect and preserve biospecimens and microbial isolates and make those available through our tissue and our space microbial culture collection. This altogether makes up a robust space life sciences ecosystem where we provide the ability for users to contribute by submitting their data from their space life sciences experiment. And we curate all of these data and make them available through our repository. We also have an analysis platform available as well as educational resources. Now, importantly, for each study hosted on the Open Science Data Repository, we provide sample and assay level metadata, and these metadata have controlled, standardized ontology and terminologies, really maximizing the AI readiness of these metadata. Not only that, on the data side, particularly for the omics data, we create standardized data processing pipelines, which are then used to reprocess all of the omics data into standardized process data products, usually in tabular format, like you're seeing here. These process data products are then also publicly available on our repository, and we make them programmatically accessible through our API in our public S3 bucket. And we're currently working on connecting these omics data from spaceflight experiments using knowledge graphs. For those of you guys unfamiliar with knowledge graphs, it's a way to represent information as a network of entities and relationships. So what you're seeing here is an example of a biomedical knowledge graph called SPOKE. and you can see like genes being associated with diseases. So these knowledge graphs really represent a great way to integrate diverse biomedical data into a single connected structure that can then be queried, visualized, and analyzed. So we want to leverage this, and how we're doing it is by using these nodes that also correspond to data that we have from model organism space biology experiments. And so we recently received funding through the NSF with our collaborators at UCSF to create the Spoke GeneLab knowledge graph to integrate gene expression, DNA methylation, and metagenomics data from spaceflight experiments across organisms and tissues to enable comparisons of spaceflight samples with their respective control, and then facilitate cross-species mapping, connecting this information to human genes so that we can then leverage information from ground-based biomedical knowledge graphs such as Spoke to explore health effects of spaceflight. On the right here, you're looking at the schematic of the GeneLab Spoke knowledge graph, looking at the different nodes and entities, and then how these are then connected to these Spoke entry points, enabling a connection of the information from these two graphs. We can then query this graph to, for example, find information about particularly interested genes, maybe a gene that's impacted at both the epigenetic as well as the gene expression level, using these cipher queries. We can also leverage these proxy nodes in the GeneLab knowledge graph to, for example, if we see a set of genes that are upregulated in rodents that were exposed to space, we can then map those onto their human orthologs, which can then be connected to the Spoke knowledge graph to get information for perhaps potential diseases that can come from that increase in gene expression. However, there are some issues with this. One being that we would have to update the whole graph anytime one of those subgraphs have an update. Also, most users don't know how to make a cipher query. So to get around these issues, we've created an MCP server to be able to use natural language to query the knowledge graph. And so what we've done is created this MCP server with instructions for how to perform cipher queries to get information from that knowledge graph. These MCP servers can then be connected to any MCP client, such as Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, enabling extraction of information from that knowledge graph using natural language. We currently have 22 tools available in our MCP GeneLab server, and excitingly, NSF has also created an MCP server to be able to query their 40 plus knowledge graphs that they have available in their open knowledge network. And I'm just going to end here with a demo of what this looks like. So this is using Claude right now, and I'm first turning off web search to ensure that the information is only coming from the knowledge graph, then turning on my MCP GeneLab server here. The first question I'm going to ask is to visualize that schema of the knowledge graph. And so it's going to pull the tool from the MCP server that allows us to visualize the schema. This is showing the nodes and relationships of that knowledge graph, as well as additional information. I always double check to make sure the web search stays off, not connected to my MCP server. I then am querying the metadata in the knowledge graph, asking to find data sets that have differential expression assays as well as differential methylation assays. It's then doing that. It gives me these 4 studies on OSDR that meet those criteria. I then ask for more information about one of those studies, OSD 48. It's showing me the different groups here. So I see spaceflight and ground control groups. So I want to find hypermethylated genes and also downregulated genes. It then gives me the output downloadable tables for both the downregulated genes and the hypermethylated genes. I then ask it to create a volcano plot for showing me both the genes that are differentially expressed as well as differentially methylated. And so it's querying that create volcano plot tool to then generate these images that I can download and use in, say, a presentation or a publication. Again, both the gene expression volcano plot is generated as well as the differential methylation volcano plot here. The next question that I'm going to ask here is to find the overlap between those hypermethylated genes and those downregulated genes. And so it's looking for the common genes. It comes back and identifies 9 genes I then asked to visualize those results using a Venn diagram. And so it go ahead and it creates the Venn diagram using the specified tool, the MCP server. I then now have the visualization of the overlap between those two queries. Again, all done in natural language. I then ask it to map those genes to their human orthologs. And this now will allow me to leverage the biomedical knowledge graph. So now I'm turning on the NSF Open Knowledge Network NCP server. And then here, the first thing I'm going to do is ask what graphs are available, because this contains a lot of different graphs here. And one of the knowledge graphs available is that spoke biomedical knowledge graph that I showed you previously. So the next question I have is I wanted to map those human orthologs from my spaceflight data set to any associated human diseases in that spoke knowledge graph. And so it's gonna go ahead and run through a series of tools in that NSF OPAN MCP server, and I make sure that my client is allowed to have access to all of those tools. It then comes back and gives me a list of associated diseases with those genes. You'll notice one prominent thing coming out here is the liver disease. This makes sense considering that the rodent data set I was looking at was from livers.
For the sake of time, again, getting to the end. Right here, maybe.
By leverage knowledge graph and connecting it to an MCP server. And so I know I am at time now, and I just want to give a big thank you to everyone on the Open Life Sciences project. I work with awesome people, as well as my collaborators on the spoke and sprint teams, the funding. And I do want to let everyone know that we are going to be starting a beta test soon for that MCP GLab server that I just gave a demo for. So if you're interested in signing up for the beta test, please scan that QR code. And my colleague, Dr. Walter Alvarado, will be available to take any questions live, or else you can email me any questions that you have. Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker. Walter couldn't come, so if you have questions for either Amanda or Walter, please go to the ESIP Slack. Again, the channel is AI4 Curation, with that 4 being a number. So let's use the remaining time for questions for Lynn. You don't get to run the mic. That's my job now. And Sean, who's online. So let me pull that up. So let me check Slack for any questions that have snuck in. Okay. Sean, they would like you to share that link to the Claude flavor, perhaps in the chat or on Slack. And there is a question for you. So can the metadata orchestrator scale easily to handle a large number of metadata records? Can it easily support other JSON metadata schemas? I have the same question. Go for it.
Yep, I'll say yes and yes to start that off. And here I am pasting the link to the Claude version here in chat. So you all have this, and you'll find at the very bottom of the README links to the Codex and Copilot versions too, if you want them. I actually have a skill inside here that is designed specifically to update the agent instructions as any API or website changes get made. So I've already seen examples where our API that accepts submissions, for example, changed. And I just told the agent, hey, look, the JSON payload has to be a little bit different now. Go compare the source code to your instructions and update the instructions. And then in one pass every single time, it's always worked. And, maybe I'll just add on that as of maybe Claude Opus 4.8 and GPT 5.6, especially like Fable 5 and 5.6 Sol, they're so damn smart that I'm perfectly comfortable just letting them run autonomously and make those kinds of updates, and they just do it correctly. Hope that answered.
Now you can hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Question in the room.
Hello. Thanks for the great talks. Corey Levinson from UC Davis here. I'm curious about your all takes on sort of the intersection between these different types of approaches. And as you know, you're all presenting about this kind of work, presumably we're all here seeing this kind of work and excited about similar sort of initiatives in our own domains. How can we as a sort of larger community be reusing the schemas for these metadata extractions that we're doing, which seem by and large to kind of be focused on, oh, I have my own role within my organization, within my repository. I'm thinking about it within that context. But you know, if we're trying to be creating these structured artifacts in a way that's as reusable as, let's say, like the bibliographic infrastructure that we have, that's a little bit more domain specific. Just curious to hear kind of your thoughts on that. If you see people wanting to push these conversations in that sort of more interoperable direction.
I certainly have thoughts, but does anyone else want to chime in first?
Lynn, how about you take it first?
No, I'll give it up. He can go. Yeah.
Question.
Okay. Well, yes. One of the ways that we're doing this with the Heliophysics software search interface is we are mapping metadata to pre-existing metadata standards, like code meta and SPACE, for example. And so I think controlled vocabularies are one way to get us past the I'm in my own siloed into a more generalized usable thing. I'd be riffing if I wanted to give other ideas, because silos and working on our own projects is a hard social thing. But yeah, there's my main answer.
Any other presenters want to come throw an answer at the mic?
Well, I can say that that's a similar thing that we're looking at and trying to rectify the metadata within the planetary community, and that goes for the international community as well. So that's basically the same approach.
Controlled metadata vocabularies.
Right on.
We're almost out of time. Any last questions in the room? I see none on Slack and no hands raised. Let's call it here. I am interested. Oh, please come.
Yep, it's time.
Thank you. This is just a plug that there is a sister session to this session that starts at 4:00 in this room, Enhancing Earth Science Data Stewardship with AI, Real World Examples and Experiences. So it's very similar, but not NASA specific. We'll have a bunch of lightning talks, and then we're going to have a general discussion, learning about what other people are doing with tools, how it's working, lessons learned, things like that. So hope to see you there.
You will see me there. Hopefully many others. Thank you for coming. Hopefully this is the start of a trend where you'll see more of us from other sciences trickling around ESIP. Again, thank you. Let's thank our speakers one more time.